Lisa, my understanding is you're ready to break down the birthright citizenship ruling for us.
Yeah, and it's narrower, Antonia, than we thought it was going to be, certainly by listening to oral argument. There are 5 justices who have voted to say that the 14th Amendment's citizenship clause protects birthright citizenship as we have long understood it. A 6th justice, Justice Kavanaugh, joins the opinion in part, but not in whole. And let me read to you his stunning first paragraph. He says that the executive order that's at issue here establishes new exceptions to birthright citizenship for children born to foreign citizens unlawfully or temporarily in the country. That the court today holds that the order violates the 14th Amendment. I respectfully disagree with the court's constitutional holding. In my view, the executive order doesn't violate the 14th Amendment, but it does contravene a federal statute. And then Justice Kavanaugh goes out of his way to say, consistent with the 14th Amendment, Congress could amend that statute or otherwise enact new legislation establishing exceptions to birthright citizenship for children born to foreign citizens unlawfully or temporarily in the country, but Congress has not yet done so. In other words, 5 justices saying the Constitution is the Constitution is the Constitution, and Justice Kavanaugh saying, yeah, I agree with them in terms of the state of federal law, but if Congress wants to change this, that's up to Congress. And so let me make a larger point about Justice Kavanaugh today. We often talk about the Roberts Court. After today, this term at least, will be a big, thumb on the scale, fist on the table for Brett Kavanaugh, who has issued multiple majority opinions today and also is really the big deciding vote here, right? By concurring in the judgment, but also leaving for another day whether Congress can make a different decision. You can see how in a court composed a little bit differently, because it is only a 5-4 decision on the constitutional ground, how this could have gone very differently, despite the fact that after oral argument, many of us thought this might be a 7-2 decision. And instead, what you've got is only 5 justices saying constitutionally birthright citizenship is the law of the land, a 6th saying it's the law of the land, but only because of federal statute. And then you've got 3 other justices saying no. They would side with the president here and say that the executive order is perfectly consistent with the Constitution of the United States because, I believe, of this phrase in the middle of the citizenship clause saying subject to the jurisdiction thereof. That was the argument that the Solicitor General made at oral argument, saying that it doesn't cover people who are not permanently domiciled in this country, making an argument that Wong Kim Ark, this 120-plus year precedent, did not settle for all time, whether somebody born in this country was in fact a citizen, but was intended to be always a narrower ruling based on the fact that Wong Kim Ark's parents had settled in California, that they always intended to remain there. They had no allegiance to their home country. And John Sauer sort of using that to drive a wedge into that citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment that previously courts did not understand to exist.
Fallon Gallagher, if you're still there outside of the Supreme Court, I'm wondering if you can give us some color here, because as Lisa just described, I mean, for months now, people have been both pretty publicly and behind the scenes expecting something closer to a 7-2 decision here. How shocked are people where you are?
Yeah, they're not shocked, but not as much reaction as I would have imagined here for such a big decision, especially one that we knew was coming today. I actually would say that I heard louder cheers when we actually got the transgender athlete ban. But again, like you said, this is a narrower split than we had anticipated. After arguments, it seemed like there was no question that the Supreme Court was going to hold up birthright citizenship. It was just a matter of how broadly, whether that was going to be 7-2 or 8-1. So a 6-3, really more of what seems to be a 5.5, 3.5, if you look at the Kavanaugh split, is a much closer ruling than we would have imagined. But again, this is still a big loss for the president, overturning one of his signature executive orders that he signed on his first day in office, upholding birthright citizenship. And as you know, this has been enshrined in our country for a very long time. We had the 14th Amendment, of course, after the Civil War. But then the Supreme Court itself upheld this precedent in 1898 with that case, Wong Kim Ark, where it said that if you are born on U.S. soil, you have birthright citizenship. And so that remains to be the case here. As far as the reaction here, Antonia, I would not be surprised if this starts to build throughout the day as word spreads. Decisions are a little bit less buzzy than they used to be in the pre-COVID times because you don't have to actually run them out in the same way. So this is one where I think the crowd will gradually build here because this is, at the end of the day, still a win for birthright citizenship.
Catherine, given what we've seen Kavanaugh do today, what does that signal to you about what may be to come here?
Well, I think it's important to say who the 5 justices are who said the Fourth Amendment means what it says. Roberts, Barrett, Sotomayor, Jackson, and Kagan. And we can expect, which was happened in the Terrace case, the president might have some words to say about Justice Barrett and Justice Roberts. But as Lisa pointed out, Kavanaugh could have went the other way, and instead of it being, 6 votes, but it's thankfully the decision came out right, but it's shocking. I was one of those I said to Lisa, it should be 9-0, but it'll probably be 7-2. Well, shocking. So we have Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas, who basically have said, you can have an executive order that changes the Constitution. It's 194 pages. I'm not as fast a reader as Lisa is, but I'll be interesting to see their rationale.
I would love to come back to one of the two of you in a minute to get an understanding from those 3 of what their explanation is here.
I will tell you what it's not.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, one of the things that's surprising to me here is that at oral argument, and I was listening to it again this morning, Justice Alito essentially recognized a really pragmatic concern. And he basically told the Solicitor General that if there were people who were subject to removal at any time, if they were apprehended and they have in their minds made a permanent home here in the United States, they've established roots. He said that raises a humanitarian problem. And I wonder, Mr. Sauer, if you can address that. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, that's a remarkably pragmatic and also compassionate thing for Justice Alito to say about sort of what we'll call the reliance interests at issue here, right? If you have parents who have come here and they are undocumented and they have made a life here and you know no country other than this. Now, granted, the executive order only covers babies who are born after a particular point in time, but his larger point is, how do you square the fact that there's going to be some real life impact on the ground here if we uphold this executive order? That doesn't appear to be a concern for him today as a dissenter.
Again, I think it is that question of intention versus impact as you're sort of looking at the court and its rationale. For me, as a civil rights attorney, Antonia, I'm really looking at the origin of where these particular amendments come from. These are Reconstruction amendments that were essentially drafted after slavery to provide citizenship to freed black persons in America whose generations before them had been enslaved. And I think that the court's defense of this is critically important because while we are having this conversation in the context of birther tourism and immigration and things of that nature, had the Supreme Court not decided the way that they did, what is to stop the executive branch from issuing another order that's even more restrictive in terms of how we define who an American is or is not, and a citizen is or is not? And again, when you're thinking about the spirit of the law, when you're thinking about the origin of these amendments themselves, without that power being limited or restricted, without the Constitution and its amendment being defended as written, the president can legislate in a way that I do not believe he was ever intended to. And what we see from the court in its decision is that they're stopping him from doing that, at least in this instance. I do agree strongly with Catherine, as well as Lisa. Should have been more people defending it, in my opinion. The fact that it survived so narrowly should be a concern because to the point that Lisa was making about Kavanaugh's opinion in this matter, he's basically laid out a path for Congress to say, all right, it didn't get done today, but if you want to do it, this is the way to go. So I also think to the question that you had asked previously, this is not over either. This is just likely going to be a battle that takes a different form. And for those people who are looking at this and wondering why does it matter? It matters because this is what defines what it is to be an American.
And it was really interesting. You're talking about the history of slavery here and the significance of that to our nation's founding and to the establishment of all of this. The president, who normally actually tries to downplay the role of slavery, did try to use it to his advantage in this case by basically almost acting as though he was like a defender of something that was specially done for black people and therefore has now been sort of misconstrued and accidentally done as a favor to everyone else. You know, we'll leave that to the side here. I'm going to